So, when I say the name Confucius, what pops into your head? For most of us, it's this image of a very stern, very wise old man, kind of the poster child for tradition, right? But what if I told you that image is almost completely wrong? Today, we're going to peel back the layers of myth and find the real person hiding underneath. And he's way more interesting.
And I'm serious about this. What if the guy who became the ultimate symbol of the establishment was actually a total outsider, a revolutionary? And for most of his life, what if he was basically a failure? Let's really dig in and challenge that old, dusty image and find the real, much more human story.
I mean, look at this. The difference is just night and day. The myth we're all fed is the stern, all-knowing insider. The reality? He was a humble, revolutionary outsider who struggled his whole life. The man we think we know? He was pretty much an invention.
So how do we get from one to the other? Well, you've got to go right back to the beginning. His story doesn't start in some fancy palace or a scholar's library. Nope. It starts with an origin story that for his time was nothing short of scandalous. Get this, Confucius was the son of a man in his 70s and a mother who was just a teenager. Now that huge age gap and the circumstances surrounding it meant their relationship wasn't even considered a proper formal marriage by the standards of the day. In fact, ancient texts have a specific word for what his parents had, yabap, which literally means a union in the wild. That one word, it tells you everything. He was born on the absolute fringes of society, the product of a union that was seen as totally improper.
And things didn't exactly get easier. His elderly father died when he was only 3 years old. His young mother, who came from a family of shamans, raised him in poverty until she also passed away when he was just a teenager. You know, Confucius himself said it best later in life. He said his many practical skills didn't come from some divine wisdom. They came from the simple fact that he grew up poor and had to learn how to do things just to get by.
So you've got this kid from the fringes of society, right? And he develops this incredible thirst for knowledge. But here's the twist. Before he became a world-famous teacher, he spent years on what you could basically call a long string of failed job interviews. His first dream, his biggest ambition, was actually to get into politics.
For 13 years, think about that. 13 years he wandered from kingdom to kingdom trying to sell himself as a political advisor. And for 13 years he was rejected by every single ruler he met. Why? Because nobody in power wanted to hear his crazy idea that government should be run by people who are virtuous and competent, not just people born with a fancy last name. So his greatest legacy, teaching, that was his plan B. It was born directly from failure.
So after failing to change the world from the top down, he figured, okay, let's try from the bottom up. And that's when he turned to education. It was here, in his plan B, that he finally found his real purpose. And this number, it's not just a number, it's his whole philosophy in action. See, back then, education was only for the rich kids, the aristocracy. But Confucius threw the doors open to literally everyone. Rich, poor, noble, commoner, he didn't care. If you wanted to learn, he would teach you. This was a radical, revolutionary act that completely challenged the social order. And if you want the perfect example of his philosophy, look no further than his disciple, Zilu. Now, Zilu, he wasn't exactly a bookworm. He was a rough, impulsive brawler, a total tough guy, who first came to Confucius not to learn, but to pick a fight, convinced his natural strength was all he ever needed. Zilu's argument was basically, hey, a straight piece of bamboo is already a good arrow. I'm like that bamboo, I'm good as I am. But instead of dismissing him, Confucius just hits him with this incredible metaphor. He says, you're right, but if you take that arrow and give it a steel tip and some feathers, won't it fly farther and hit harder? And it worked. That one conversation completely flipped a switch for Zilu. He became one of the most loyal followers Confucius ever had. The ultimate proof came years later. As he was being killed in battle, Zilu's very last act was to carefully straighten his hat, because his master had taught him that a gentleman keeps his composure even at the moment of death. Talk about a transformation.
Okay, so we have this picture of a humble, revolutionary guy empowering people from all walks of life. How on earth did we get from that to the rigid, state-sponsored ideology of obedience we call Confucianism? Well, the short answer is, his ideas got hijacked. This right here is the perfect example of how it happened. Let's take the word chung. To Confucius, it meant something deeply personal, sincerity, being true to your own conscience, your own heart. It was about personal integrity. But centuries later, the government took that word and completely twisted it to mean one thing and one thing only: absolute, unquestioning loyalty to the emperor.
So here's how it went down step by step. About 300 years after he died, the Han Dynasty needed a way to unify their giant empire. So they went through his work with a highlighter, basically. They cherry-picked the parts that supported state power and social control, twisted the meanings of words like loyalty, and just ignored all the inconvenient stuff, like his ideas about challenging rulers who weren't just. And just like that, the revolutionary was repackaged as a champion of the status quo. The man became a myth.
So after all that, after tearing down the myth, what's the big takeaway here? What's the most important thing to remember about the real Confucius?
That stern old man you see in statues, he was an invention. The real man is so much more relatable and, frankly, so much more inspiring. He was a guy from the margins, a failure in his chosen career, who found his true purpose by believing that education could empower anyone and everyone. Understanding that humble, striving man, that's the real key to his philosophy.
And you know, it really makes you think, doesn't it? Who else have we gotten completely wrong? What other complex, human figures have been flattened into simple icons over the centuries just to serve someone else's agenda? It's a powerful reminder to always look for the real person behind the legend. All right, let's dive in. Today, we're taking a fresh look at a philosopher you probably think you know, and we're going to reveal why he was actually one of history's most radical thinkers.
So, when you hear the name Confucius, what comes to mind? Probably some stuffy, old-fashioned guy, right? A stern, rigid traditionalist? But what if I told you that whole image is just wrong? What if he was actually a radical revolutionary? We're about to totally dismantle that myth because the real story is way more exciting.
Okay, so to really get to the heart of his revolutionary ideas, we've got to understand the man himself. We need to look at the world he lived in, this really turbulent time that shaped, his every single thought.
See, he was far from some establishment figure just propping up the status quo. No way. Confucius was a genuine outsider. His entire philosophy was a direct challenge to the very foundations of the society he lived in. I mean, a direct challenge.
So let's get into this radical outsider thing. His worldview, it wasn't shaped in some cushy palace or a quiet library. Nope, it was forged in hardship. It was born from his experience as part of a displaced, conquered people.
So, get this. His family were descendants of the Shang dynasty, the vanquished Shang dynasty. They were literally forced to flee their home and live as refugees. And then, after his father died, Confucius grew up in poverty. This whole outsider experience, it gave him this incredibly sharp, critical perspective on everything: power, privilege, what a truly just society should even look like.
And this comparison to the Jewish diaspora is so powerful. I mean, think about it. A life of constant uncertainty, of always being on the outside looking in. That forces you to think differently, right? It forced Confucius and his people to develop this really innovative and profoundly different way of seeing the world, pretty much just to survive.
Okay, so how did all this hardship actually translate into his philosophy? Well, the answers are kind of hiding in plain sight. You can find them right in the opening lines of his most famous work, the Analects, which, by the way, is a collection of his sayings that his students put together.
And the very first line of the Analects, it's not some dusty old rule. Not at all. It introduces this powerful, deeply personal idea of happiness. And it starts with you, the individual. And you really have to pay attention to the specific kind of happiness he's talking about here. This joy, it's not about external stuff like getting a promotion or winning a prize. No, it's that inner thrill of understanding. You know that eureka moment when something just clicks? That's it. It's a satisfaction that nobody can give you and nobody can take away from you. Then, in the very next line, he takes that internal feeling and immediately blows it up, expands it outward. He moves from the purely personal to the social. And again, this isn't just about, hanging out with your buddies. This delight he's talking about is super specific. It's the happiness you feel when you connect with people who are on the same wavelength, the same intellectual or spiritual journey. We're talking about fellow travelers who really truly get what you're passionate about. So, you see the pattern here? The crucial point is this two-step process he's laying out for a meaningful life. Step 1, find your internal joy through learning and improving yourself. Step 2, find your external delight by building a community around those shared values. It's brilliant.
And for Confucius, learning was not about cramming for a test. It wasn't just memorizing stuff. It was an active, creative process. It was about making connections, kind of like weaving all these different threads of ideas together to create this big, beautiful tapestry of understanding.
Then there's this other huge idea, Ren, which we translate as humanity. He saw it not as some fixed trait you're either born with or you're not. Instead, he saw it as a seed of potential that exists inside every single person. And with the right care, the right cultivation, that seed could blossom into real empathy and compassion.
Okay, this all sounds great in theory, doesn't it? But what happens when the world pushes back? What happens when you fail? This is where the rubber meets the road, where the philosophy really gets tested. And there's this famous story about Confucius and his disciples that reveals pretty much everything about what this all really means. So picture this. Confucius and his followers are lost. They're starving in the wilderness. And he turns to them and asks, why? Why has it come to this? And their answers show 3 totally different ways to deal with failure. First, Zilu blames them. He says, we must have failed. We're not good enough. Then Zigong blames the ideals, basically saying, your standards are too high. We should just compromise. But then Yanhui, his favorite disciple, offers a third way.
Yanhui says, basically, our principles are true. If the world won't accept them, that's the world's problem, not ours. And Confucius praised this answer. This is the most critical lesson of all. It's easy to have principles when everything's going great. But your true character? That only comes out when you hold on to your values through hardship, especially when you're facing failure and rejection.
And that right there, that focus on inner principle, that's the lasting, truly revolutionary impact of his whole philosophy. You see, it was never about creating some rigid system of rules for people to follow. It was about empowering each and every individual to cultivate their own character.
I mean, this was an absolute bombshell in his time. Think about it. He lived in a deeply rigid hierarchical society where your birth decided your entire life. And here comes Confucius, arguing that nobility isn't about your bloodline, it's about your character. That meant anyone, a farmer or merchant, even a refugee like him, could become a noble person through learning and self-cultivation. Absolutely radical. So in the end, the timeless message of Confucius isn't about blindly following old rules at all. It's a call to action. It's about this radical belief that personal growth is always possible. So the real question he leaves us with isn't some ancient riddle. It's for you. Right now, what will you choose to learn?